Psyched to have this conversation with you all today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come and listen in, and please drop questions into the chat as you like. As we mentioned, this is a product discussion. We want to dive in on all things product, right? It's at the core of what we do is servicing our customers with data-driven solutions. So we're really excited to have this conversation with you all and kind of give you a walkthrough of, where we've been, where we're headed, where we're making investments into product, to help continue to create value for our customers and for our investors long term. So with that, just for a little background, my name is Chris Lustrino. For those who don't know me, I'm the founder and CEO of Kingscrowd. I started Kingscrowd about 7 years ago now, which is pretty wild to think about. And we've really built kind of the premier data solution for the online private markets, the digital private markets, however you want to phrase it. Since we've started the company, we have quite literally tracked and rated, 10,000 plus private companies that have utilized Reg CF and Reg A plus. We pretty much have 100% coverage of equity and debt offerings of private companies in the space, and are building a really, really interesting database of financial information and insights on the industry. And we're now taking all of that data and finding unique and interesting ways to provide solutions to different end parties in the market. So excited to dive in on what all of that means. And I'm going to pass it over to Brian here to give a little background on himself, and then we could get into all things Kingscrowd.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris, and welcome to everybody for joining us today. So as I was telling Chris before, always happy to interact with potential customers, investors. We want your feedback, and we want to share some of the great things and amazing things we're building here that you can look forward to in the coming weeks. So myself, a little bit of background. Brian Belley, background technically was in aerospace mechanical engineering, but similar to Chris, I saw the huge opportunity just in this online alternative investment space back in 2017, 2018. Started my own company, Crowdwise, at the time, focused on education and building some tools. And then that was acquired and became an official part of Kingscrowd around 2021. So I've been with Kingscrowd for probably a little over 4 years now in official capacity, and just continuing to build out amazing tools with this great team that Chris has built, and really excited to share a little sneak peek into some of the things that we have on the docket for 2025 and looking forward this year.
Awesome.
Also, yeah, just one other quick thing.
Ahead.
So I think it's really important to understand that Chris and I also really understand the pain points and the friction points, as we are both investors ourselves, right? We invest in all these alternatives online. We're using the platforms. We dog food and use our own tools, right? Whether it's the portfolio tracker, the deal screener, all these different things, we are using them daily in our own process. So I've made, I think, 230 startup investments at this point in time. And I know Chris has made a whole bunch himself. So we are coming at this from that perspective of really understanding the customer. But I will hand things back over to Chris now to kick things off.
No, that's exactly right. Yeah. And just on my side, I've made about 40 individual investments just in this market alone. And I've made dozens of others in real estate and private credit and things like that. And then made almost 45 out of the Kingscrowd Capital Fund. And quite literally, before we have our investment meetings each week, I go on Kingscrowd and I'm searching and using the tools to filter and do all the things. And then I go to Brian and say, hey, Brian, can you do this? Can you help me with this list? I want to create a following list. I want to create this, that, and the other thing. So we truly do kind of eat, breathe, and sleep everything we do here at Kingscrowd. Brian, if you want to pull up the deck and kind of just give folks a little more background on, the opportunity at hand, and then we'll dive in on product.
Absolutely. So today, what we're going to be going over is we'll give a real quick framing and reference just to bring everyone up to speed again on just the problem and the opportunity of Kingscrowd and where we see it in the market. We'll then talk about all the product accomplishments in 2024 that we did, and we can actually dive into the website and show you some of those new features, new tools that we've added for investors as well as for founders and entrepreneurs. And then we'll give you a little bit of a sneak peek into 2025, just in terms of some of the big items that we have on the roadmap planned for this year that we really see as great levers to help us grow the business and also provide value, right? That's what we're here for. We really want to make sure that our customers, whether you're an investor, whether you're a founder who's raising capital online, and anyone in between, platforms, service providers, we want to give you the tools to be able to help you succeed. So just to bring everyone up to speed, right? I'm mentioning that Chris and I are both startup investors ourselves. And one of the big questions that we always ask, right, is why now? Because there's this kind of investment adage, right, that being too early is often not different than being wrong. So why is now the right time for Kingscrowd as the opportunity? There's three key trends that we really see in the market that we are very excited about in terms of just the potential for Kingscrowd, especially as we look into 2025. First, this has been a multi-year, even multi-decade trend, but companies are staying private longer. I don't think this is anything that's going to surprise anyone here, right? But if you just take a look, this graph is since 2015, but you can go back even further. And both the number of IPOs and the proceeds have been in kind of a downward trend. And you can even see, in the 22 through 2025 timeframe, we're looking at kind of multi-decade lows for IPOs. Reason for that, right, is these companies are staying in the private markets longer. They have more access to capital now where they didn't have that in the past. And so they're able to stay private for longer. You can see from just the 20 years, 20,000 through 2020, 2000, we are down 38% in IPOs, and it's been 12 years on average now for a company to IPO. So all that being said, you have to go to the private markets for a lot more investment opportunities. The second big trend that we're seeing is that, again, American retail investors and retail investors in general continue to be on the rise. So this is a chart showing basically retail investment volume. And you can see around that COVID era, 2020 to 2021, retail investment in public markets really, really spiked. But the surprising thing, which, if I had taken a look at this chart, I might not have expected, is that it's actually sustained since that time. And if not only sustained, it's actually been hitting new all-time highs. So basically, what this is saying, there's this quote from Deloitte that in 2021, retail investors in the US generated as much equity trading volume as mutual funds and hedge funds combined. Again, that number just blew me away when you're talking about the amount of dollars that are being transacted by everyday investors like you and me. Lastly, the big trend that we're seeing, right, is that these regulations from the SEC and just everything else that have been outdated for 90 plus years and basically haven't been touched are now starting to change pretty rapidly. So you go back to 1934, that's when the SEC was established, but it wasn't until 2012, right, nearly 80 or 90 years later, when the Jobs Act was signed into law, and then that didn't even go live until 2016 for Reg CF. Now what we're seeing is that the limits are being increased, as we saw in 2021, and we have seen the industry data in the charts that shows us that that has been leading and attracting more mature issuers to come in and start using it. And then obviously 2025, there's a new administration now in place in the United States, and we're seeing a lot more expected policy reforms that should open up more investment opportunities and more access to capital for entrepreneurs moving into the future. So the problem with all of this, right? It sounds great from that timing perspective, but these are huge fragmented markets. So there's thousands of investment opportunities every single year across hundreds of platforms, and they're not being presented in a consistent way. There's often a lack of transparency, right? There are less regulations, less disclosures, and that makes it harder for investors to be able to get access to the info that they need in order to make these investment decisions. Not only that, but a lot of these people, everyday investors again, are typically doing this on nights, on weekends. It's not their full-time job. Because of that, they have a real lack of resources and especially a lack of time. And so at Kingscrowd, what we are doing to address all those problems is we are aggregating all of that investment data across those hundreds of platforms. We pull from dozens of diverse data sources ranging from the SEC to company offering pages to websites to LinkedIn profiles and more. And then we aggregate all that data and put it in an easy to use single consolidated tool to be able to help any investor to be able to find, research, and track all of their investments in one place. Now, when we take a look at this, I'm going to hand this over to Chris so Chris can talk about our lines of business, and then we'll dive into the actual product in terms of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so something we've worked a lot on over the last 2 years is really honing in and focusing in on who are our core customer segments. We recognize that, at the center of everything we do is data, right? You'll see on this image, right? We have the Kingscrowd data logo, and that is the core of everything we do. All we do day in and day out is collect data, QA data, ensure the data has high fidelity and is working really, really well, and that we have 100% market coverage across Reg CF, Reg A plus equity and debt offerings, right? That is what we do. But what that powers is a multitude of solutions for different end parties. And if you're an investor, right, Kingscrowd consumer, you're going to be using our subscription product. You may be investing in Kingscrowd Capital. You may be in our newsletter where we run sponsorship opportunities, or you may have even been to one of our live events or virtual events that we host, right? And those are our consumer offerings. But all of those consumer offerings are powered by our data, our ratings, our analytics, our analyst reports, all of our research, all of the investments we make. All of that is powered by our data, but we have a suite of solutions built around the investor who's trying to access and invest in these markets in a more intelligent way, powered by that one data solution. And over the last 2 years, a big area of emphasis for us has been recognizing that as many investors were using our platform, so too were founders. And so we ended up building out this whole Kingscrowd advisory business line that's becoming really, really interesting and a meaningful part of our top line revenue. And it's really focused on taking all of these data insights, right? If you think about it, we've collected 10,000 form filings across Reg CF and Reg A+. You take all of that information, you could start to templatize and automate a lot of the processes around filing all of the documents you need to raise capital in this market. And you could take that a step further and you start thinking about the ability to actually be able to give people valuation ranges and market comps and help them figure out where they should list and structure their deal and what security type they should use. We have all of these answers we can provide to the founder group because we have all of the data on all of the market comps, all of the marketplaces at an individual and aggregate level. So we could really help founders actually navigate these waters in a far more intelligent way with a suite of solutions for them. So we have a whole advisory line of business, but also still powered by the same database that is Kingscrowd. And lastly, we have all sorts of industry participants, whether they're marketing agencies, legal agencies, platforms, researchers that are in our space, all wanting to buy our data, the back end data, whether it's for business development, market intelligence work, creating their own solutions. We'll show you in a little bit. There's a company that actually started up. They have this really cool front end website for customers where they can come and find all the deal flow in our market, but they didn't build that. They built a front end, but the back end is powered by Kingscrowd. And we see more end parties coming to us in the financial services space, wanting to purchase our data through our API to create new solutions for this market. We see a huge scaling opportunity there long term. So we have these three core lines of business, right? Consumer, advisory, and institutional. And while they're all serviced with something a little bit different, really all it is data insight products. And so that's something we've worked really, really hard on over the past couple of years and is enabling us to much further commercialize our data business going forward. So we're really excited about what that means for our business. And it very much follows the model of a Bloomberg and a Morningstar who sell to both individuals, institutions, and other industry players. So with that, I'll kick it back to Brian.
Awesome. So with this context, we want to give a quick 2024 year in review, especially focusing on the consumer side. I think a lot of the people here are interested in what some of those investor tools and features are that we have released in the past year. And then we'll take a look forward in 2025 in terms of the coming months and quarters of some of the things we have on the roadmap, and especially some of the big drivers of potential new business. So we take a look at 2024, right? To put this in perspective, right? The equity crowdfunding markets in general have kind of pulled back from their 2021 highs, but have been holding somewhat, I will say, kind of level since then, maybe a little bit down 2024. Despite that, we have actually been seeing really good growth, both in free users and also with some of our core engagement metrics on our paid product. But in terms of products that we released last year, each quarter here, I was putting this out and I noticed it was really kind of focused on almost a different area for each of these quarters. So Q1 of 2024, we released a lot of investor focused and investor facing features. We did our deal considerations red flag checklist, which we can show you. This pulls out some of those key areas of risk that people would be interested in, such as, does a company have really low runway? Are there founders or insiders selling shares? Any types of things that might not be a reason not to invest, but might be a red or yellow flag that you want to look into and understand better. We surface those and we bring that nice and easy right up front for the investor to see. In addition, we launched a lot of new features around our portfolio tool. And one of those things around Q1 of last year was the tax center. This was an MVP. It was really basic, but what it did was it started integrating with our database of all the exits and failures. We track more than 500 exits and failures to date across all the companies that have done investment crowdfunding rounds. And it automatically ties those into your portfolio and can start showing you, hey, did you know that one of these companies had a potential, a liquidation or an IPO or an exit? And it allows the investors to be able to get more actionable info to be able to help them prepare their taxes. Then Q2, we took a look and we were focused a lot more around founder and some of those B2B opportunities. So we had several partnerships. We also focused a lot on equity crowdfunding boot camps and tools for the founders. So it was really leveraging our startup investment valuation tool, which we can show with a quick demo. But that basically is a quick form that people will fill out, say 10 to 15 questions about your business. What industry are you in? What's your current revenue? How many employees do you have? It then takes those inputs, looks it up against the database of 9,000 private companies that we track, and comes back with info such as companies like you tend to raise this much money on average or tend to have a valuation range in this range. So again, it's giving more actionable info and some of those insights to founders and entrepreneurs who potentially want to raise capital to be able to help set them up for success. In addition, in Q2, we actually had the SEC, the US SEC, started using our data, and a whole bunch of other great things on the data front. But that flowed really well into Q3, where we focused a lot more on some of the data infrastructure and also the public-facing API. So as Chris mentioned, and we can show this after, we launched our public data API in Q3 of last year. We had several people start using it. And as Chris mentioned, we'll show one of the ones that actually built a full-fledged tool powered by our API on the back end. In addition to that, we made a bunch of updates to company pages, data structure, and financials. So showing things such as the most recent revenue, cash on hand, and burn rate, making it more prominent and easy from a UI, UX, user experience perspective on raise pages. And in addition, we made a lot of improvements to our integrations with Edgar through various connections there. Then in Q4, we focused, sometimes you don't always have these investor focused or investor facing releases, but there's still a lot going on behind the scenes. So we focused a lot on infrastructure. We were upgrading some of the site security, putting anti-bot measures in place, also improving our conversion tracking because as we're talking about with this fundraise, right, we really want to look to start reaching out and start with more of a focused user acquisition effort with some of the funds that are raised. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that we have our conversion tracking set up, that we have really robust funnels so that we're not pouring a bunch of people into the top of funnel and leaking it out. We want to make sure that we're retaining those customers and that we're really engaging them and putting our best foot forward. So we kind of laid that foundation, so to speak, for a lot of what we're going to be doing in Q4 of last year. So we'll give a quick demo of the features. I'll jump into the website to show a little bit of this, and then we will come back and take a look at the 2025 features and the product roadmap moving forward. Chris, feel free also to jump in if there are any questions or anything in the chat so that we can make sure that we're hitting those. Let me know if anything comes in.
Awesome. That sounds great. And just one thing as you're pulling that up, what does this all drive towards as an investor, right? What we're trying to do is solve more pain points for our customers. So that all helps with customer conversion where people say, hey, there's value here and I need to come and use this service. Then there's a reason for them to stick around. And we continue to see better conversion metrics and better retention metrics, which all drive lifetime value, so on and so forth, which drives towards a better business, right? So this really does all feed into what we're trying to accomplish from an investor perspective as well. But yeah, Brian, give us a walkthrough here.
Awesome. So a lot of updates we made last year were to the actual company fundraising pages on Kingscrowd. This is an example for Atom Beam, which is a very popular raise, right? They raised nearly $20 million as part of their Reg A offering last year. And a few things that I want to just highlight on this page. So for anyone that had seen this a year ago, this definitely looks a little bit different. But even some of the updates we've been doing more recently is, for example, showing when a company is testing the waters. So all the red data points here show that this raise was actually in the testing the waters. It's basically a way for the company to collect commitments, but not necessarily actually get that money from investors until they file their Form C or their 1A filing with the SEC. And we've been seeing that sometimes there's a lot of confusion. It's not always clear when a company is testing the waters. It's not clear when they transition. And so we're going to be showing that much more clearly, as you can see now on this raise page, for when a company goes from testing the waters to actually a live funding round. In addition, I mentioned the deal considerations checklist, so where we highlight some of those red and yellow flags. You can see here basically what it's doing is it highlights that this company had a high revenue multiple at 157x. There's other things sometimes if there's unclear valuations, platforms might not always disclose or do a valuation calculation based on the number of shares outstanding and the share price. So whenever there's things like that, we're highlighting that here. We'll have things like repurchase rights if the founders are insiders are selling shares, and a whole bunch of other different like low runway, revenue drop, different areas like that that investors should be aware of before they actually go to invest. Scrolling down a little further on the page, we can see these are some of the company financials that we've really been looking to improve. Now, again, a lot of this has come from user feedback, like many of you on this call. So if you ever have something and you're like, you know what, it would be really great if I had X on this page, feel free to send us a feedback email. Chris and I are always very open. You can reach out to product at kingscrowd.com and we get all of those suggestions and feedback. But what we added here, right, is showing you the revenue, the burn, and the runway, just in a really easy to digest format, and also showing, year over year growth. Then you can still view the detailed financials. So in this case, it was a Reg A plus raise. So you can see the balance sheet and the statement of comprehensive income info here. In addition, we've been continually making improvements to our analyst reports. So these analyst reports are actually enhanced by AI. We use various different backend systems and APIs to be able to expose more of this data that we collect, right? We have more than 300 data points on all of these companies. And oftentimes the hard part in getting some of that info visible to investors is how do you present that? And so by integrating with some of these different LLMs and then also having our investment analysts, working alongside that, we're able to take a lot more of that data and then make it accessible to investors in a format that is both consistent. So, right, these price, market, team, the different sections are always going to be consistent, and also presented in a way that is easy to digest. Then we have had this in the past, but again, one of the important things, right, when you're taking a look at a company, especially if they've done prior funding rounds, is how much capital have they raised prior, showing the funding round history over time, and then different growth charts, right? So if you're looking at revenue growth history over time, valuation, price per share, we track all of these things across multiple funding rounds, and we're going to continue to release new features in the coming year that will hopefully integrate that even more into your portfolio so that users can get some of those updates and get better insights on their company and their holdings based on, progress as they do new funding rounds. So this is an example of the raise page. A few of the updates again, and there's going to be a lot more coming on the portfolio side. So one of the things I talked about last year is we integrated the exits and failures into the portfolio. So as a sample portfolio here, this is just a test portfolio, but you can see it either within your portfolio or if you go to the tax center, and it will show you that, oh, hey, of those 9 investments that were in my portfolio, 2 of them may have had an exit or a failure. So in this case, it's highlighting Atlas Motor Vehicles, which actually had an IPO, I think back in 2021, as well as Unbanked, previously Turnio Block Card, which I believe went out of business. So both of these things are being highlighted automatically so that as long as those users are just tracking those investments in their portfolio, we're going to be able to make their lives a little bit easier, save them time, and provide more value by giving them some of those insights directly there. Now, one of the other things that we've launched from a content perspective is we've been focusing a lot on, how do we improve our SEO, make more educational content, make more content accessible to users and able to be searched. So we've launched this investor knowledge base, which is just an easier way. You can think of it to kind of search some of the education and the other analysis and podcast content that we have on the site. But all of this, again, is leading to, as we're going to show, very much improved SEO, which means more organic traffic, more organic clicks, which means, our customer acquisition is benefiting in these various different ways. Chris, any other areas you want me to walk through? We've done a ton of updates on the website, to be honest, so to go through everything.
The only other one was actually on the company's page that you had pulled up for Adam Beam, just showing them the company information section, the company and team. I know some people
Absolutely.
they want to be able to go and look at the LinkedIn's and all of that, and it's really accessible now.
That's a great point. So one of the things before we've always collected, and again, on the back end, we collect hundreds of data points, right? So it's just sometimes how do we display that in a way that's intuitive and easy for the average user? So on the company and team tab, you can see all of the founders, the founders' roles, and then we have direct links to their LinkedIn. So clicking on these goes to the LinkedIn. And for anyone who has tried doing research on a founder sometimes, it can be very hard to find, if people have a different name or they have a slight variation in how it's spelled on LinkedIn versus in the offering, it can be hard to find that. But we get that for every single founder, co-founder who's raising on these platforms. And it makes it very easy to do that diligence to see what their prior history is. Are they a content kind of influencer? Maybe they have published some stuff to be able to help you make a more informed decision. Awesome. Let's go back to the slides. And again, if anyone ever has comments or thoughts, make sure you're sending them to us. But a couple other things. Oh, we should show Deal Digger actually, so I can dig. I'll pull that up. So Deal Digger is this website again that is 100% powered by the Kingscrowd API. So everything that you're seeing here is powered by our API. So you can see that it basically pulls up very simple pages. And again, it's kind of for their newsletter to be able to surface certain deals of interest. But any of the data here is being powered and run on Kingscrowd by Kingscrowd. So just really cool kind of proof of concept to show that in the future, we can provide a lot of value, not only to the investors, not only to the founders, but even the other infrastructure providers who are in our industry that need access to this data in a really structured way. All right, let's pull this back up here. So a couple quick updates as well, because while we talk about the product side, investor focused, founder focused, we also have lots of partnerships with different universities, and there's different also partnerships with founders that we can explore in terms of user acquisition. So one of the things I'll highlight that we've actually been doing more in 2024, and that we see this integrating into our strategy in 2025, is partnering with some of these founders to share our Kingscrowd reports when we give a rating, when we do a report on some of these companies. The one showed here is just an example from Bitterbrains, but this is an example of how we're being really scrappy to be able to get more basically awareness out there about Kingscrowd, about the great products that we have, without necessarily having to spend hugely on marketing or different things. So you can see here, when we contact a company or a founder, we might say, hey, you got a great rating. Hey, we're writing this report on you. If you want to share this with your audience, we can unlock it, for maybe your audience for a couple days or something like that. What that then does is it gets us exposure to that audience of investors, and then we can get new referrals through that partnership with the founder to be able to share that. They get the benefit of, hey, here's an independent ratings or analysis by a research company in the space that says we're a potentially good investment opportunity. And what we get in return, right, is more exposure, more awareness. So we're doing a lot of kind of these, guerrilla marketing and reaching out through founders, for example. Here's a different one for another company, Legion M, where they do these newsletter sends, they post on their pages, and all of this is getting the word of Kingscrowd out there to more investors. All right, we already covered the public data API, so let's take a look at 2025, because we have a few really interesting things that are both, I will say, we've been working on for a while, and then also some new things just through some of the more recent acquisitions as well that we can dive into. So we take a look at the 2025 roadmap. This shows kind of the different things we have planned for the first 2 quarters, as well as some of the longer term different items for later this year. So first, as we already mentioned, we've done some of those testing the waters updates, some of the data updates. Another thing we're going to be launching in this quarter is Kingscrowd Academy. So this is basically an online course in education that we're going to be launching that will be able to help investors who are starting out, right? So think of it as that startup investing 101 to help get good onboarding, to be able to help get people more up to speed with the knowledge that they need to be able to invest and be able to leverage the tools that Kingscrowd has to offer. So we're going to be launching that hopefully in the next month or so. Now, in addition, another huge thing, this bullet here in terms of Crowd Lustro near-term integration, this is a company that, as Chris has mentioned before, and Chris, maybe you want to talk a little bit about more of the acquisition, but it's going to unlock some really potential interesting opportunities later this year. So, Chris, you want to just give a quick recap of the Lustro integration, what that looks like before we dive into
absolutely. So we acquired Lustro at the beginning of the year. Lustro is essentially the only investor relations platform that's ever been created specifically focus on serving Reg CF and Reg A plus issuers with an IR platform to share with investors. So the idea here is a couple of things. One, we could simplify the process of founders interacting with investors. So for founders, they're going to be able to come to Kingscrowd by integrating Lustro into our platform, and there will be a free solution for founders to be able to get access to templatized versions of investor updates. We'll prompt them with questions and be able to create a really nice investor update hub for them. All of those updates will then actually get stored again directly on the Kingscrowd IR platform, and that link becomes shareable. That every time you do a quarterly update or a monthly update or an annual update, whatever it may be, founders can send that to all of their investors. And then, as we've found over the years, is a lot of the serial issuers, especially who have thousands of investors, things get lost in spam, people change their email, so on and so forth. You get all of this communication that, hey, I haven't seen the updates in 6 months, a year, whatever it may be. Well, now there's going to be a hub where you're able to find all of the historical updates from the company, and we're going to simplify the process for founders so that they're more likely to do it. And then additionally, by building this closer relationship with founders where we're saying, we're prompting them and we're helping them write these investor updates, and we're providing a hub for them to be able to manage all of their kind of investor relations with their individual investors, we also will have the opportunity to say, hey, we see that you did a Reg CF last year and you haven't yet filed your legally required annual report, right, with new financials. We could help you with that with a really low cost, affordable solution. Hey, we see you haven't raised in the last 18 months. Are you thinking about that next raise? Let us help you walk through the process of where might be a good place to list, how much you might expect to raise, what your valuation could be based on your new fundamentals, so on and so forth. So really building a way to stay in touch with and build a relationship with the founder and continue to provide them value while also driving them to provide more updates and information to the investor base, which we think is really, really important. One of the biggest pain points we hear from investors is they want more updates from their founders. Hopefully, this is one step in the right direction of trying to drive towards that.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, it's such a huge opportunity where, right, where data again is our core. We're really creating this flywheel around that data set. And by bringing in investor relations, that's another huge piece of this puzzle that's going to allow us to have better data overall, but also be able to provide more data and more updates to investors that they might not be getting otherwise. So as Chris mentioned, I think that flows really nicely into the other bullet here with more updates in portfolios. This is something we've definitely heard from many of you as a big pain point, right? You make an investment, you might not get an update. Yes, you could get it from the founder, but there are other ways out there of getting updates from some of the companies that you've invested in. So for many people who maybe aren't aware, companies are required to do these Form CAR, annual report filings every year. We're going to be looking at integrating that more integrally into the portfolios so that you can perhaps click on a company and then see, oh, hey, here's the last few annual report filings. Oh, awesome. I've seen, well, maybe I didn't get an update or they haven't done a funding round in the past few years. Look, their revenues have grown 2x year over year for the past few years, or they've hired a bunch of new employees. We're going to be extracting some kind of key info as proxies for progress, and then being able to display that in users' portfolios to be able to give you a better snapshot of your portfolio progress over time. And in addition to that, another feature we've heard often requested a lot, but it's like, can I just get an estimated value of my portfolio, right? We've already got the number of shares that you invested in, the price that you invested in. And since we know the latest price per share, perhaps, right, if they did an offering, we can start showing, and with some dilution assumptions as well, if we need to for valuations, what your estimated portfolio value is of which investments are in there. In addition, we're also always going to be making improvements with the data and like company level financials. One of the things we're doing here is looking to not just show you here's the current fiscal year and prior fiscal year, but since we now have seen this company perhaps for 3 or 4 funding rounds, why can't we just piece together, their financial history over the past 6 years or 7 years? So we're going to be showing that just in a more streamlined way so that when you're assessing opportunities and when you're looking at your portfolio, more of this data is integrated to be able to give you that more actionable information. So then looking at Q2, right, we have obviously, as Chris mentioned, the Lustro integration for the investor relations platform. So we're hoping to launch that in kind of a beta, closed beta, probably in May, and then go live with that around June. In addition, we're going to be adding some more alerts and basically advanced features to your portfolio. So if you've invested in a company that launched a new funding round or a funding round that's closing sooner than expected, instead of having to go to the Kingscrowd website and get those updates of whenever things are happening, we're going to be looking at doing more push alerts. So you could sign up perhaps for email alerts and then be able to just get an email. You set a screener for a certain type of company with a valuation. Whenever something launches that meets that criteria, you get an email instead of having to go and check every day. These are the types of product, feedback loops that we're looking at that really helps to both re-engage customers to make sure that they're getting a lot of value out of it and saving them time, right? It makes sense if you don't have a lot of time to be able to go and check the website every day, but if you can set up an alert, that's a great way and a great piece of value being provided. In addition, just looking longer term, there's a lot of other things still on the backlog and even a lot more that we don't mention here. But we're going to be continuing to make improvements, for example, in our ratings algorithm. So we actually have looked at that periodically, say once or twice a year, and we say, okay, ratings are working pretty well, but where are some of the areas, if any, that we think we could improve? We back test it, we look again to make improvements to that. So that's something we're going to be looking at doing this year. In addition, there's a lot more just around the portfolio feature and portfolio tool that we think we can introduce. So looking at making it more of a social aspect and a social experience where people could subscribe or follow other portfolios. All of that is something that's enabled because we are building this really robust data set of all these different companies, but also all of this user interaction in the community that we're building here. We think that's really important. So we're really just touching on a few of the many things we have going on here, but you can see that there's a lot planned for even just the first half of 2025. And then in addition to this, we have all of the ongoing efforts as well, right? So we're constantly doing data sales. We're talking to new people for outreach and exploratory partnerships, and then all of the content and education that we're doing, whether it's the Kingscrowd Academy, as well as Investment Roundtable. If anyone here hasn't checked out those weekly posts and podcasts that we do on YouTube, and then Chris has a fantastic podcast as well, Inside Startup Investing. So all of these resources are really enabling everyone, all the stakeholders in our industry, to be able to make more of these informed decisions. All right. A few quick trends we just wanted to show also that we're starting to see in the industry and in the business that shows that yes, these things that we are doing are having a positive impact. So for example, one of the things I mentioned is working on our website from a performance perspective. You need a website that's easy to use, that loads quickly, and that is serving up really valuable content. Now, how do we know that we've been doing a good job on that? If you take a look back over the past 5 or 6 quarters, we can actually see that our organic search engine, so SEO, search engine optimization, I think a lot of people are probably familiar with that term, right? But it basically means if someone goes to Google and types in, is Kingscrowd a good investment? Do you show up in those top few results or are you further down? And then if you are showing up there, how likely is someone to actually click through? So what this is showing is basically the sum of the clicks in the blue bars here and the number of impressions, so the number of time it actually shows in a result for someone who's searched in the red. And what you can see is we've had consistent quarter-over-quarter growth where we've seen year over year, if you compare Q1 extrapolating out where we're going to be probably by the end of Q1 versus Q1 of last year, seeing around 50% year-over-year click growth and 40% year-over-year impression growth. So it really shows us that the efforts that we're investing in just in terms of website optimization and search engine optimization are definitely paying off. Now, in addition, we can also see this in our free user account creation. So again, I mentioned that there was a bit of a pullback after COVID, right? In the markets, people, as interest rates were rising, were perhaps investing a little bit less in startups. So because of that, through 22 and 2023, we kind of saw things mostly level. We've actually now started seeing an uptick again in the market. And this is going back to, why it is now the right time. If we take a look from our Q1 through Q4 of 2024, we saw 73% quarterly new free user account creation growth on Kingscrowd. So this means that, over that same quarter, we're almost getting, not quite double, but almost getting up to that double number of signups versus what it was just 3 quarters earlier. And with that, I'm going to pause here. I know we have some questions coming in. It looks like we got about 20 minutes. So Chris, is there anything else you want to touch on before we jump into Q&A?
No, I think that's great. Thank you very much, Brian. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Yeah, happy to hit on some of these questions. Uh, Brian, I'll read them off and then feel free to give your thoughts. So from Scott, we have, I'm a portfolio and Edge member. Thanks for your product and service. One thing that is missing for me personally is many of the private investments don't show up as they were not necessarily publicly available. For instance, SpaceX, OpenAI, Boom, Aviation, etc., that were part of a series done by WeFunder. Also, I have some issues with semi-private deal room offerings done by Republic. Any solutions for those? I can enter them, but there is no tracking updates, etc. Most of these were accredited only investments.
Yes. Awesome question, Scott. Now, this is something we have been thinking about a lot because while Kingscrowd really started out focused on Reg CF and Reg A, right? Part of the reason for that is that every company that does a Reg CF offering or Reg A plus offering online have to do a filing with the SEC. So from the Kingscrowd workflow with how the business kind of got started, whenever that company or any company made one of those filings, that's what kicked it off and got it entered into our database. And then all of our crawlers and API connections go out and basically gather all the data that's needed. So one of the things that can be tricky, as you allude to, is that Reg D investments aren't always disclosed. They might not even always do a Form D filing, which they're supposed to do after the round closes. However, what we are thinking about is, are there ways that we can add more tracking into this? So as you mentioned, if anyone made an off-platform investment, that's kind of how we refer to it, right? If you're doing a private investment, you can track it in your portfolio, but as you mentioned, it's not linked to that company today. Now, one of the things we are looking at is we may have the capabilities to eventually in the future, we want to expand and cover more assets. And so we may be able to link that up. So we don't have that today, but it is something that we think about often. And on the like Republic side, however, so there's kind of two types of private offerings, 506C, which you can actually see and advertise, and 506B. The B ones are private. That's going to be a little more tricky, but we are thinking about if there are ways that we could actually get more of these 506C offerings on the platform so that they could be tracked. So I would say stay tuned. We don't have anything, necessarily on the roadmap for the next month or so, but it's something that we're definitely thinking about.
Awesome. Yeah. And just one other thought there. It's not only, hey, this is how we were built, so we're stuck doing that. It's more what uniquely differentiates Kingscrowd from anyone else is that every deal that's on our platform, A, is a deal that anyone can invest in, but B, we could provide real fundamental analysis with real quantitative ratings. And a big piece of that is knowing all of the terms of the deal, all the financials of the company. And that's the type of information you just don't get in traditional Reg D. It's not that we don't want to move there and that we're not open to providing analysis and tools there in the future. And I absolutely think it's something that needs to be on the roadmap for us. But at the end of the day, we really care about where is our core differentiator. And it's when we could get those really deep, rich insights from more data offered under things like Reg CF and Reg A plus, so on and so forth. Going to our next question regarding the upcoming email and in-app alerts feature, will it be available to any user, Edge Pro members only? This would be great if it was available to all users, as it would afford investors the ability to find out if private companies are still active or have shuttered operations. I've found it challenging to find this type of information when searching through CF platforms and private company databases such as Crunchbase and PitchBook.
Yeah, great question, Andrew. So our philosophy, right, is we definitely want a lot of our tools, for example, general portfolio tracking to be available to anyone, even if you don't necessarily are investing actively or if you don't have a ton of money. Now, once we start talking about some of these more premium features, I think we're going to be working with customers to find out, is this something that might make sense at a certain price point or something that we could offer? I think that there's obviously added cost and other things that come along with that when you start talking about email and in-app alerts. So for example, one model I could see, this doesn't mean we're necessarily going to do this, is maybe you get like 1 or 2 free alerts, but then if you want to set up more than that, right, that's when you have to be a pro level paid feature. Now, that being said, I think Chris and I both think that what you get for the paid Edge membership today is extremely good value, right? And so for especially an active investor, you get great value just in terms of being able to save your time, getting that additional diligence. So one of the things as we're looking to do more of these portfolio features is we want to provide more value to investors who might not only be investing actively right now, maybe you invested a few years ago and you're kind of on pausing and like holding steady for the time being. We want to provide more features to you at that Edge premium membership level that helps to still save you time, give you more of those updates. So I know that's a little bit of wishy-washy in terms of I'm not saying yes or no if it's going to be paid or not, but I think the right answer is that we will definitely work to see what makes the most sense when we get there.
Thanks, Brian. And one other thing I'll mention is if you go to the Kingscrowd website, you can check out the exits and failures tracker. Just again, at least you could skim through and see which ones, have exited or failed. So I think that's helpful. And there's quite a few updates in there now going all the way back to companies that raised many, many years ago. So that's helpful. We're going to be integrating more of that information directly into your portfolio, but we are working to continuously find more ways to provide those updates. And by the way, if you are an investor and we have investors like this all the time who do get information about a company closing or exiting or selling or whatever it may be, send that to us. Let us know. We could always post that and make people aware that it was investor provided. We maybe haven't been able to verify the information. We always try to, but at least we'll have that on hand to be able to share with other investors to be able to find that information. The other thing that we are working on and we're just starting to ingest is secondary data on Start Engine. So Start Engine, if you go to Start Engine, they haven't heavily promoted it yet, but you actually have the ability to post your shares that you've bought into Reg CF companies over the life of the industry, post them, and you could put a price on how much you're willing to sell them for and potentially be able to sell them. There has to be a buyer who's willing to buy in at that price, but we do see transactions happen all the time. And it's actually something we're big believers in here at Kingscrowd. I have a question here asking about planned IPO and exit opportunities for Kingscrowd. For me, we always obviously keep all options on the table. Do I believe an S&P, a Morningstar, a Bloomberg public equity provider may come in at some point and want to purchase us? Of course. And we've had conversations with many of the biggest providers out there as they get more interest in this space. But for me, I see a massive, massive long-term opportunity here over the next decade plus to build a company that quite literally resembles that of a Bloomberg or Morningstar S&P. And obviously that's projection and lots of execution and things that have to happen in the market for that to become a reality. But we see a really large long-term opportunity. That doesn't mean that we want to hold you up from getting liquidity along the way if that's important to you. So, with our Start Engine raise currently, the idea is that in a year, right, you have to hold shares for a year under Reg CF rules, but we will make it available whether you've invested offline or online in the past. Our goal is to be able to provide liquidity to investors if that's something you're looking for, where you will be able to post your shares on Start Engine, and if there's a buyer, be able to find a buyer and sell your shares at a price that you deem appropriate. But for us, we see a huge opportunity on that secondary sales side to build all sorts of interesting tools around providing ratings analysis ongoing for those businesses that are available on the secondary to give you a sense of whether or not they're good buys in that moment of time, based on what people are willing to sell them for. So all sorts of interesting data opportunities there for us going forward. One thing, okay. Narendra, what is your current API subscription revenue, if any? Yeah, so we do have API revenues now coming in the door. It's it's in the five figures somewhere. It's still early days. We started with mostly beta testing customers to understand what their use cases are and what their needs are. So we see, on our consumer business, we have product market fit. On our founder advisory business, we have product market fit. On data sales, we have product market fit. Data API is our newest product, and that's the one where we're still exploring what the actual use cases are. Deal Digger was the first one to launch a product on top of what we're doing. We're in talks with one of the larger financial publications in the public equities world that's very, very interested at their VP levels to explore getting our data API and licensing our data to do something really interesting on their platform for likely, millions of users. So there are big opportunities that we're exploring, but we're still figuring out what the use cases are going to be and who's going to come in the door and want to license those. So it's still early days with that, but we are getting paying customers on that front. Let's see. Let me answer that. Great question, Barrington. Given that Kingscrowd aims to be the Amazon of crowdfunding investment data, can you share how you plan to scale the business to deliver strong ROI for early investors like myself? Great question. So that goes everything that we're talking about here today, right? If you looked at a raise about a year ago, what we said is we're really entering the phase of commercialization of our data and the things that we've built. What we found in the first 3 or 4 years of our existence was we had to build data and a brand and get people to actually trust that the data we had was worthwhile and it was correct and that it worked and that our ratings worked. And we really had to build that name for ourselves in the market. And it was much more about testing and iterating and just getting those early adopter customers to utilize the product and prove that we really had something here. We've now moved into a phase where we get on a call and it's no longer, who are you? What do you do? It's, okay, how much and how can I use your services yesterday? And that's a very different conversation than we were having 3 or 4 years ago, right? So we're moving into the commercialization phase. And as we've moved into that phase over the last 18 months, it's become very clear what our pillars are, right? That consumer, institutional, and advisory business, and what we're serving each end party with. So for us, now it's really about leaning into growing each one of those revenue lines from founder-led sales, where everything was pretty much me. We didn't have a marketing budget. We didn't have a sales budget. It was just whatever I could produce and whatever we could get from organic traffic, right? And now we're putting the infrastructure in place for marketing and outbound marketing efforts. We're putting the infrastructure in place to have a sales team and a sales budget. We brought on our first director of sales on the founder advisory side of the business, and we've had the best January and February we've ever had on the founder advisory business in almost 3 years. We're up almost 300% on revenues through the first 6 weeks of the year, which I think is pretty phenomenal. And it's because he's finally unlocking the pipeline that we've been building. So we're investing heavily in growth on those core business lines where we see opportunity in the near term. And that's going to take us to the next step as a business, start getting us into the millions of dollars of revenue. But then there's going to be those next steps to take us to the tens of millions of dollars in revenue. So we have a long, long way to go, but we think we're making a lot of progress and building the right solutions that people are looking for. I think that's all the questions we have that we haven't already answered. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I will drop the link to invest in Kingscrowd. So today is the last day that there is kind of early bird perks where you will get additional shares if you invest. So there's kind of like pseudo discounts that they give, bonus shares that you'll get. That are actually pretty meaningful. So I highly, highly suggest you take part in those. We'll send a link afterwards as well, but I will just drop the link here if you're interested in investing. We have one more question here from Brian. What's the current runway? Great question. It's somewhere between 8 to 12 plus months. And I think that's being fair and reasonable. We could probably be more bullish than that. We have a really manageable burn and a solid balance sheet. So we feel very good about where we are. And we have really positive prospects on continued capital raising for our business right now and revenue growth. So we're feeling really, really good about the spot we're in at the moment. Terrific. Seeing if there's anything else. Any upcoming live events? Great question. We will be posting those soon. Our upcoming events will be in Atlanta and Chicago, but we are planning more for the year, both with Fidelity and some new partners as well that we're working with. So pretty excited about those, and certainly stay tuned on the newsletter to hear about those. Well, if that is all the questions we have, thank you everyone for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you all. Thank you for your time, your questions, your thoughtfulness, and your willingness to be a part of this journey. It's been a pleasure speaking with you all. Thank you, Brian, for all of your time here today and for the wonderful products that you're building. And if you have any questions, you could always reach out to me at chris@kingscrowd.com if it's regarding investing in Kingscrowd, and product@kingscrowd.com if you have any questions, thoughts, comments, or ideas for our product team. Thank you everyone so much for joining today, and have a wonderful day. Take care now.